The smell of smoke pulled me out of my sleep. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard the crackling, the heat, the glow of fire licking at my window. I shot up, heart hammering, and rushed to the door. When I stepped outside, my world stopped. My father's tractor, his pride and joy, the last piece of him I had left, was engulfed in flames. Flames so high, they reached for the sky like twisted fingers. And across the road, standing just beyond the flickering light, were 4 figures in the shadows, watching, waiting. Then one of them stepped forward, her face illuminated by the fire. Regina Caldwell, HOA president, smirking. That's when I knew. This wasn't an accident. This was war. And they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. The gravel crunched under Tom Harris's truck tires as he pulled up to the small farmhouse he now called home. It had taken him years to get here. Years of sweat, sacrifice, and service. The military had been his whole life. And when he finally hung up his uniform, he wanted nothing more than a quiet life in the countryside. He wanted a place where he could hear the wind rustling through the fields, where the morning started with the smell of fresh earth instead of office coffee. But this place, this 5-acre slice of heaven, meant more than just retirement. It was about legacy. Sitting in the middle of the yard, gleaming under the morning sun, was his father's 1960s John Deere tractor. A beast of a machine, older than most of the houses in the neighborhood, but still built to last. It had been his father's pride, and now it was Tom's. He could still hear the old man's voice when he ran his hand over the faded green paint. "You take care of this land, son, and it'll take care of you." Tom had no grand ambitions, just a simple life. Some crops, maybe a small garden, a place where he could breathe. But peace was a luxury he wouldn't be afforded for long. The first sign of trouble came just 2 days after moving in. It was early morning when Tom stepped out onto his porch, coffee steaming in his mug, the air crisp with the scent of cut grass. That's when he noticed it. A sealed envelope taped to his front door. The thick paper, embossed in gold lettering, read, "Welcome to Oakridge Estates HOA. Membership required." Tom furrowed his brow, flipping through the contents. Inside was a letter, neatly printed with the following demands. Mandatory HOA membership fee, $600 per year. Compliance with community standards. Farm equipment prohibited. Violation notice issued. Tom scoffed, shaking his head. This had to be some mistake. His property wasn't part of their planned development. He had checked, double-checked. He tossed the letter in the trash, thinking that was the end of it. It wasn't. She came that afternoon. Tom heard the sharp clack of high heels against his gravel driveway before he even saw her. When he turned, there she was, Regina Caldwell, HOA president. She was dressed to impress, wearing a blazer so crisp it could cut glass. Beside her stood 2 men in polo shirts, arms crossed like mall security guards, ready to intimidate. "Mr. Harris," she greeted, though her tone lacked any real warmth. "I see you've received our letter. I wanted to personally welcome you to our community and clarify our expectations." Tom sipped his coffee, unimpressed. "I appreciate the welcome, but I don't think there's anything to clarify. My property's been here long before the HOA was established. It's not part of your development." Regina's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "I'm afraid that's a common misconception. You see, every property within this zip code falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. And unfortunately, that thing," she gestured vaguely toward the tractor, "is a direct violation of our aesthetic guidelines." Tom chuckled, setting his coffee down. "You mean my father's tractor? The one that's been here since before your HOA even existed?" Regina sighed, like she was explaining something to a child. "I understand sentimentality, truly. But rules are rules. We have property values to maintain. We can arrange for its removal at a discounted rate." "Not happening." Regina's jaw tightened, her nails tapping against the clipboard she held. "Well, Mr. Harris, I urge you to reconsider. Failure to comply will result in fines, and should those fines remain unpaid—" She smiled sweetly. "The HOA has legal avenues to ensure compliance." Tom stepped forward, looking her dead in the eye. "I fought in wars, Miss Caldwell. You really think a couple of paperwork bullies are going to scare me? For a moment, just a flicker of a second, something flashed in her eyes. Anger, maybe even humiliation. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with another polished smile. I do hope you change your mind, she said smoothly. Have a wonderful day. With that, she turned, her two lackeys following close behind. Tom watched them go, his gut telling him that this fight was just beginning. The harassment started the next morning. First, it was the notices, stuffed in his mailbox, taped to his door, even wedged under the windshield wipers of his truck. Violation, unauthorized farm equipment. Violation, non-compliant landscaping. $200 fine due immediately. Then it got worse. Every day, HOA board members would drive by slowly, snapping pictures of his property. His fence was mysteriously cut one night, letting his dog wander into the road. One morning, he found red paint splattered across his barn door, a crude message scrawled in bold letters. Get out. Tom wasn't a fool. He knew exactly who was behind this. But what could he do? The police barely cared. Neighbor disputes. They called it. File a complaint with the county. They said. He did. But by the time anything would be done, his land might already be taken from him. And then, the final straw that IT was just past midnight, when Tom woke up to the sound of rustling outside his window. He sat up, heart pounding, listening. Then came the sound, a metallic clank, followed by the faint hiss of liquid. His gut twisted. Gasoline. He shot out of bed and ran to the window, just in time to see a shadowy figure standing by his tractor. Before he could react, a bright orange flame erupted, spreading across the ground like wildfire. Tom scrambled, grabbing the fire extinguisher by his door. He sprinted outside, the cold night air biting his skin as he fought to smother the flames. But it was too late. His father's tractor, the last tangible piece of his legacy, was already engulfed in fire. The heat was unbearable, flames roaring as the machine groaned and buckled under the assault. And then, across the street, he saw them. A small group of people stood in the shadows, watching. Regina, and 3 of her board members. One of them smirked. Tom's breath came in heavy, furious gasps. His hands clenched into fists, soot staining his skin. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was war, and he would not back down. The air was thick with the stench of burning rubber and scorched metal. The flames clawed at the night sky, turning everything into a violent shade of orange. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he fought against the fire, his hands gripping the extinguisher so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But he already knew it wouldn't be enough. His father's John Deere tractor, the last real connection to his family's legacy, was dying right in front of him. Smoke stung his eyes as he sprayed every last ounce of extinguisher foam onto the burning machine. The hiss of chemicals mixed with the crackling flames, but it was a losing battle. The fire was too strong. A voice rang out behind him. Fire department's on the way. Tom turned, barely recognizing his neighbor, Bill Thompson, through the haze of smoke and anger. Bill stood on the edge of the driveway, garden hose in hand, his face twisted in shock. Tom's hand shook as he dropped the useless extinguisher. His gaze shot across the road, to the dark figures standing just beyond the streetlights. And there she was, Regina Caldwell, flanked by 2 of her HOA board members. Watching, smirking. Tom took a step forward, his fists clenched. You did this. Regina tilted her head, feigning innocence. Now, Tom. You really shouldn't jump to conclusions. Tom's whole body trembled with rage, but before he could say another word, the distant wail of sirens filled the air. Regina sighed dramatically, looking over at her board members. What a shame. If only you'd followed the rules, this never would have happened. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away. Tom stood there, fist still clenched, heart still racing, watching as the fire department arrived, too late. The tractor was gone. But this war? This war was just getting started. The fire department confirmed what Tom already knew. This was no accident. There was gasoline residue on the ground, soaked into the dirt in an intentional pattern. Someone had doused his tractor and lit the match. But the real gut punch came when the police arrived. The officer, a man named Sergeant O'Connor, was polite but distant. He took Tom's statement, nodded in all the right places, and then sighed. We'll file a report, but without hard evidence, there's not much we can do. Tom stared at him in disbelief. You're telling me my tractor just randomly combusted in the middle of the night? The officer scratched his chin. I'm telling you, unless you have proof, video footage, witnesses, we can't charge anyone. Tom's jaw tightened. Proof. That's what he needed. Something that would force their hand. That night, as he stood over the blackened husk of his father's tractor, something shifted inside him. This wasn't about a tractor anymore. This was about principle. And Tom Harris wasn't the kind of man who backed down. The next morning, Tom barely had time to process the situation before his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Tom, it's David Ross. Tom blinked. David Ross. A name he hadn't heard in years. They had served together in the military, once brothers in arms. What's going on? Tom asked, trying to keep the exhaustion from his voice. David hesitated. Listen, I saw the news about your farm. About the fire. Tom frowned. How the hell did you see that? There was a pause. Then David said, let's just say, I'm in a position to hear things. And what happened to you? It's not random. Tom's grip tightened on the phone. You're telling me something bigger is going on. I'm telling you, David said slowly. You're not just dealing with a petty HOA. You're dealing with people who have powerful friends. Tom's stomach turned. He had suspected that Regina wasn't acting alone, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold chill down his spine. David continued. You still at that farm of yours? Yeah. Stay put. I'm making a call. And then, just like that, the line went dead. Tom set the phone down, his mind racing. What the hell had he just stepped into? Tom didn't have to wait long for the next strike. By noon, another thick white envelope had been shoved into his mailbox. Inside, in bold red letters, were the words, Final notice. Pay your fines or face legal action. Tom shook his head in disbelief. Fines? For what? For existing? Attached was an itemized list of violations. Unapproved farm equipment, $1,500 fine. Non-compliant landscaping, $500 fine. Failure to maintain HOA standards, $2,000 fine. Total due, $4,000. Tom let out a bit of laugh. This was a shakedown. Plain and simple. And as if on cue, his driveway was suddenly filled with 3 expensive SUVs. Regina Caldwell stepped out first, her high heels crunching on the gravel, sunglasses perched on her nose. Afternoon, Tom, she said, smiling as if they were old friends. I trust you've received our notice? Tom crossed his arms. You're out of your damn mind if you think I'm paying a dime. Regina clicked her tongue. Tom. This is just business. You're in violation. And if you don't comply. She gestured toward the legal paperwork. Well, I'm afraid the HOA will have no choice but to pursue alternative measures. Tom's blood boiled. You mean stealing my land? Regina smirked. Call it what you like, but the law is on our side. She turned to leave, but then paused. Looking over her shoulder, she added, You should really reconsider, Tom. This can still be easy. And then, just like that, she was gone. Tom watched the SUVs disappear down the road, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. If they wanted war, they just got one. Tom didn't have to wait long for David's call to come through, because the very next morning, his quiet little farm was swarming with black SUVs and men in suits. The Secret Service. Tom barely had time to react before one of the agents, a tall woman with a no-nonsense expression, stepped forward. Mr. Harris? I'm Agent Riley Collins, Secret Service. We need to talk. Tom blinked. Secret Service? What the hell is going on? Agent Collins didn't hesitate. The president will be here within the hour, and we need to make sure everything is secure. Tom's stomach dropped. The president. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. First the fire, then the fines, then the threats, and now the damn president of the United States was coming to his farm. Before he could even process the thought, another wave of SUVs rolled in, and then, stepping out of the largest one, the president himself. Tom could hardly breathe as the leader of the free world strode toward him, extending a hand. "Tom Harris. Heard a lot about you." Tom shook his hand, still in shock. "We need to talk about what's really happening here," the president said, scanning the charred remains of the tractor. And just like that, Tom's world changed forever. The air was thick with tension. Tom stood at the edge of his property, arms crossed, as a crowd of HOA members gathered on the road outside his fence. They came armed, not with weapons, but with signs, banners, and loud voices. No farms in Oakridge. Rules are rules. Sell and leave. Tom's jaw clenched as he scanned the group. Regina Caldwell stood at the front, megaphone in hand, her lips twisted into a smug smirk. "You see, ladies and gentlemen," she shouted, This right here is why we have rules. This is why the HOA exists. To prevent eyesores like this from dragging down our beautiful community." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Tom felt his blood boil, but before he could step forward, a voice beside him stopped him. "Hold your ground," said Agent Collins, standing firm with her arms crossed. The Secret Service agents flanking the property didn't so much as blink. And then, the sound that changed everything. A deep, rumbling hum filled the air. The wind kicked up dust. The protesters' signs wavered as the noise grew louder, stronger, until suddenly, a military helicopter descended over Tom's land. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the President of the United States stepped onto the field. The sheer power of the moment sent a ripple through the protesters. The yelling stopped. The chanting died. Regina's smirk wavered. And Tom finally let himself smile. As the helicopter blade slowed. President Harrison stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel of Tom's driveway. A hush fell over the crowd. Even Regina seemed momentarily stunned into silence. The president extended his hand. "Tom Harris," he said, his voice steady. "I've been briefed on your situation." Tom shook his hand, still trying to comprehend what was happening. "The President of the United States, here, at his farm. I want to talk about your land," Harrison continued, "and why it's about to become a national security asset." Murmurs spread through the HOA crowd like wildfire. Regina's mouth opened and closed as she tried to process what she was witnessing. "Wait just a minute," she finally snapped. She stormed forward, shoving her way past the stunned onlookers. "What is the meaning of this? This man is a menace. He's violating community standards. This land belongs to Oakridge Estates." The president turned toward her. His expression darkened. "You must be from the HOA," he said. Regina straightened, adjusting her blazer. "I'm Regina Caldwell, president of Oakridge Estates HOA, and I demand to know why." The president held up a hand, silencing her immediately. "This land," he said, his voice suddenly colder, sharper, "does not belong to Oakridge Estates. This land is private property, and it is now a federally protected site." Gasps. Regina blinked. "What?" The president turned back to Tom, ignoring her entirely. "This farm," he continued, "is about to become the flagship site for a classified government agricultural initiative, a program that will revolutionize food production in this country." Tom's breath caught. His land, his simple, quiet 5 acres, was about to become something much bigger. And Regina Caldwell was about to lose everything. The president gestured toward Jamal, Tom's old military buddy, who stepped forward, holding a thick file folder. Jamal opened it and turned it so only Tom and the president could see. Tom's stomach dropped. Inside were topographical maps, geological surveys, and classified documents. "This isn't just about farming, Tom," Jamal said quietly. Tom looked closer. There, under his very land, was something he never expected. A massive underground aquifer, one of the largest in the state. Tom swallowed hard. "Water." Jamal nodded. "Not just any water," the president added. "Strategic water reserves. The kind that could dictate the future of farming, drinking supply, and even energy production." Tom exhaled sharply. No wonder the HOA wanted him gone. No wonder the real estate developers were circling like vultures. They weren't just after property. They were after control. and they were willing to do anything, even burn down his home, to get it. Regina was still seething, arms crossed tightly. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "This man is a nuisance. He doesn't belong here. He's been nothing but a problem since he arrived." The president raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly makes him a problem?" Regina huffed. "He refuses to comply with the rules. His tractor was an eyesore, so we—" She stopped, but it was too late. The words had already left her mouth. The president's eyes narrowed. "So you admit to targeting him?" Regina's face went pale. "I know, I never said that." Agent Collins stepped forward, holding up a tablet. "Sir," she said to the president, "we have security footage from the night of the fire." She pressed play. Tom watched as the color drained from Regina's face. On the screen, clear as day, were two of her own board members, HOA maintenance workers, dousing his tractor in gasoline. Then, the words that sealed her fate. "Regina wants this thing gone by morning." Silence. And then, "Regina Caldwell," Agent Collins said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, harassment, and destruction of private property." Tom had never seen someone go from powerful to powerless so fast. Regina screamed in protest, kicking and thrashing as the agents restrained her. "You'll regret this," she shrieked as they led her to the waiting SUV. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Tom just smiled. "Oh, I think we do," he muttered as Regina was taken away. Agent Collins wasn't finished. She turned toward the stunned HOA board members. "We've been investigating this HOA for months," she said, pulling out another file. "And guess what? We found corruption at every level." One by one, names were called. One by one, HOA board members were arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and illegal land seizures. By the time the dust settled, over a dozen arrests had been made. And Oakridge Estates, the HOA that had ruled with an iron fist, it was dismantled overnight. As the last of the police cars drove off, the remaining homeowners stood in stunned silence. Then slowly, they started clapping. Tom turned, surprised. His own neighbors, the same ones who had ignored him for months, were now cheering. One woman stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Tom, I am sorry. We were all scared of Regina. We didn't think anyone could stand up to her." Tom looked out at the crowd, and for the first time since moving here, he felt like he belonged. The morning after the arrests, Oakridge Estates was eerily quiet. For months, Regina Caldwell and her HOA minions had ruled with an iron fist. They had terrorized homeowners, extorted money under the guise of neighborhood standards, and destroyed anyone who dared to stand against them. But now their empire was in ruins. Tom stood on his porch, watching as moving trucks lined the streets. Some board members had been released on bail, but they weren't staying. They had lost everything, their power, their status, and for some, even their homes. Bill, Tom's neighbor, walked over, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." Tom smirked. "Guess the HOA didn't account for the president stepping in." Bill chuckled. "You really pissed off the wrong people, huh?" Tom's smile faded, because deep down he knew this fight wasn't over yet, and the real enemy was still out there. As word spread about the arrests, the remaining homeowners in Oakridge Estates finally found their voices. For years, they had lived under Regina's rule. They had been fined for absurd reasons, threatened with lawsuits, and bullied into submission. But now they fought back. An emergency neighborhood meeting was called in the community center. Tom was invited, not as a target, but as an ally. When he arrived, the room was packed. And at the front, a new face. Eleanor Hayes, a retired teacher, soft-spoken but respected. She cleared her throat and addressed the crowd. "This HOA has been a dictatorship for too long," she said firmly. "It's time we take our neighborhood back." Applause. Cheers. Tom leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He had never wanted to be a leader in this fight, but somehow he had become one anyway. And as homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA entirely, Tom realized something. This wasn't just his victory. This was a victory for everyone Regina had ever crushed under her boot. A week later, Tom received an official government letter. It was stamped with the presidential seal. Inside, a single message. Your land has been officially designated as the first test site for the Veteran Farming Initiative. Funding is secured. Full support granted. You did good, Tom. Tom let out a slow breath. It was really happening. A day later, contractors arrived. They cleared out the fire-damaged remains of his barn, making way for the new vertical farming structures. Experts from across the country arrived, working alongside veterans to build something revolutionary. One of them, a young engineer, shook Tom's hand. This project's going to change farming forever. And it started because you didn't let some HOA push you around. Tom just nodded, because deep down he knew. His fight had been about more than just a tractor. It had been about standing up for what was right. The grand opening of the Veteran Farming Initiative was met with national attention. News crews flooded Tom's property. Government officials attended. And at the center of it all, Tom's fully restored John Deere tractor, shining in the sun like it had never burned at all. Jamal nudged him. Can't believe we went from a neighborhood dispute to a nationwide farming revolution. Tom smirked. All over an old tractor. Jamal grinned. Yeah, but that old tractor started something big. Tom looked out over the newly built farm towers, where crops were already sprouting, and for the first time since moving here, he felt truly at peace. A few weeks later, Tom was sitting on his porch when a school bus pulled up. A group of fourth graders stepped out, their teacher leading them toward the farm. Tom raised an eyebrow. What's this? The teacher smiled. Part of the new initiative. We're bringing kids out here to learn about farming, sustainability, and what it means to stand your ground. Tom chuckled, shaking his head. Never thought I'd be a teacher. One little girl ran up to the shiny green tractor, wide-eyed. Mister, did you know your tractor would change the world? Tom smiled, placing a hand on the machine that had started it all. No, he said softly. I just knew it was worth fighting for.